Good evening. My name's Chris Prince. I'm the Dean and Pro-Vice Chancellor of the Faculty of Business and Law here at Leeds Beckett University. And it's my privilege to welcome you to the Rose Bowl, which is the home of Leeds Business School. And tonight we have our Leeds Business School guest lecture series, the final one, but this is definitely last but not least. And what we've got today is or will be a very interesting talk, I'm sure. I know we sponsor these lectures with Yorkshire Bank, our partners, and I'd just like to say thank you for their support over this year. So tonight we are very pleased to welcome Kirsty. Kirsty's Group Head of Organisational Effectiveness at BP, and as one of BP's most senior executives, Kirsty is extremely well placed to talk to us this evening about clarity, confidence and choice, women in business in the 21st century. After graduating from Cambridge with an MA in economics, Kirsty has worked for BP for over 20 years in the UK and overseas. Some of Kirsty's recent roles include being European Head of Sales, Marketing and Logistics for BP Petrochemicals, Director of Strategy and Marketing for BP's Global Business-to-Business Marketing Operations, and Chief of Staff of the Refining and Marketing Division of the company. In addition to her roles within BP and keeping her husband and 2 sons in order, Kirsty is also a non-executive director of the Kier Group and also a lay governor of the university here at Leeds Beckett. Kirsty also finds the time to be on the steering group of the Women's Oil Council and the 2% Club. In addition to that, Kirsty's hobbies include relaxation such as studying medieval history, chocolate, which I assume is eating rather than studying, and supporting the wrong United football team. I'm sure we won't hold being a Manchester United fan against her or mention the defeat to West Brom at home at the weekend.
Thank you.
Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please can I welcome Kirsty Bashforth.
Thank you. It's great to be here this evening, quite an intimate setting, and I feel quite formal now because I've got a bit of a speech really, because I've got a lot of data and a lot of things I want to share, and I tend to talk too much. So to keep it precise, I'm going to use notes, but there's going to be no slides, so I'm afraid you're just going to have to listen. Anyway, I've got about 30 to 40 minutes of material. And it's really to share my thoughts and experiences of being a woman in business in the late 20th and first part of the 21st century. And they do come from my experience in corporate life, as Chris mentioned, in the last 24 years. The bruises, the bumps and the fun. And I do recognise that I'm also talking mostly from an OECD experience, for those of you who are not focused on that area. And I also want to be clear, I'm starting from a philosophy that gender balance, better gender balance across the whole talent pipeline, as part of a more diverse workforce generally, is not just the right thing to do, but absolutely delivers better business value. So I'm not going to make the business case for that tonight. I'm considering that done and commenting on progress to date and how we can make more progress in the future. So I'm going to make 4 points and then I'll go into the details. So the 4 points I'm going to make are, first point, I do believe there has been enormous progress in the last quarter of a century that I've been working. But it's not even, it's not consistent, and while there are following winds in the environment that do help, there are also headwinds, limiting factors, which means I don't think we can expect perfect gender balance in the world of business anytime soon. We need to keep up a concerted effort and focus well into the future. So that's my first point. The second point I want to make is this focus is not just up to women. Neither is it just up to the system. This is men and women together. Every person, every organisation, whether it's legislatures, businesses, individuals, working on both the structural and the social sides of business and working not just for today, but giving back for the future. That's my second point. My third point is that this is no longer an issue of women in the workforce. This is how men and women work together going forward and how we are most productive through all the diversity that the next generations of leadership bring. The system is changing. And the fourth and final point I'll make is that while this change is going on, these following wins for women in business, in the short term, definitely there are more choices for women in business around the world. But as an individual, if you are a woman, you have to be clear what you want and be willing to make those choices. You can't let them wait to come to you. So I'll talk where I think there's been progress, where there hasn't been progress, and some of the enduring challenges, what I think we can do about it, and a little bit about the choices I've made along the way so that you can understand why I'm sharing the things I am. So, who am I and what qualifies me to talk about this? And Chris has shared a bit, so this will save a bit of time. So I am a woman working in a male-dominated industrial environment and have been doing so, and only doing so for the last 24 years. My entire career so far, and I have loved it to this point. I've learned a good few things about how to succeed and plenty about what doesn't work. So as Chris mentioned, I have 3 roles in my working life. The first one is my executive career, which has been always at BP and now head of Group Organisational Effectiveness in a workforce which operates in 80 countries and has 85,000 employees. So just to place me, that places me in sort of top 100 of the company is where I sit. I've got my non-executive career, director at Kier Group, FTSE 250, and lay governor of this university, Leeds Beckett, which I'm very, very proud of. And then finally my role as a businesswoman trying to give back into the system, the overall system of better gender balance across the talent pipeline to try and move things forward. And so I'm in various councils and also a member of the UK board for the Centre of Talent Innovation, which is a New York-based think tank. I am from the Isle of Man, but I have lived, which I'm also extremely proud of, rapidly Manx. And I've lived and worked with my family all around the world, including in Copenhagen, Brussels and Chicago twice, which I think would probably be my second home. In the last, while I've had a very commercial career, as Chris mentioned, for the first 16 years of my career, in the last 8 years, I've led work in BP that focuses on how to get the best out of such a large working population. How we work, not just what we work on. So looking at the organisation as an asset that needs to be continually invested in and maintained like any asset. So not just a bunch of talent working in an office or an operating environment. So I therefore lead all the work in the company on values, behaviours, diversity and inclusion, engagement, change management and organisational design. And so as you'd imagine, being an economist as well, I'm very, very driven by what makes people tick, for which you might read nosy. But for many, this is summed up as being the guardian of the organisational culture of the company. I'm sort of the go-to person if you want to really know what's going on. So, to my first point. There is lots of progress and some very helpful environmental factors, but it's uneven and don't expect miracles in the next 5 to 10 years. So why do I say this? So I'll start with a few numbers. Let's start with some data on boards in the UK. We have moved from 11% of women on boards in FTSE 100 companies to 23% in the last 4 years as a result of the Lord Davies report issued in March 2011, showing just what peer pressure can do when people are faced with the threat of regulation, particularly in a British sense, from the European Union. We actually only need 11 more women on boards in FTSE 100 companies to reach 25%. That will be 11% to 25%, which is an astonishing achievement. And things are moving forward globally as well. If you look at boards, for example, in China, the Alibaba board recently launched in the stock market, has 40% of its board are women. Norway, France, and now Germany have also quotas to move women on boards forward. And Japan, which I'll talk a little bit about later, is on a bit of a push for different reasons. So that's something on boards. Senior executive roles. In the US, the Time 100 list for 2015 has just come out, again, as it does annually. Out of that top 100 of women influencers and power list in the US, 40 are women. It was 41 last year, so it's pretty flat. There are women CEOs of IBM, YouTube, Yahoo, Hewlett-Packard, General Motors, and of course Angela Arendts, who ran Burberry here in the UK, is in a critical role at Apple. Here in the UK, in the FTSE 100, we have Liv Carfield, originally from Harrogate, running Severn Trent. We have Carolyn McCall running EasyJet, Veronique Laurie running Kingfisher, Moya Green running Royal Mail, Alison Cooper running Imperial Tobacco, and in terms of chairwomen, we've got Dame Alison Carnworth running Land Securities and Susan Kilsby running Shire. All of that's in the FTSE 100, so some progress. In terms of the sorts of roles, we also have some progress. The sorts of roles women are leading in around the world. Just look at Zaha Hadid as a globally renowned architect. Who would have thought that 20, 30, 40 years ago? And looking at politics and finance and public life, we have Angela Merkel in her 3rd term. Everybody said she wouldn't last. Christine Lagarde running the IMF, pretty well. Janet Yellen running the Federal Reserve, not a small job. And Hillary Clinton running for president, and Carly Fiorina about an hour ago has finally announced she's also running to make sure there isn't only one woman in the race. So that's sorts of roles. In terms of numbers of graduates, a bit more data. UNESCO Global Education Digest study in 2009 showed that women had begun to outnumber men in worldwide university enrolments and graduation rates since 2003, so not just recently. In North America and Europe, a third more women than men are on campus. In a number of countries, at least 2 female graduates for every male. These countries include, you may be surprised to hear, Bahrain, Barbados, Guyana, Latvia, Myanmar, Estonia, Uruguay, Qatar, Iceland, Panama, Lithuania and Hungary. And in terms of a bit of data on recruitment into organisations, for example in BP this year, our latest global recruitment for graduates is up to 46% female. We made it to 38% last year, 46% this year, so we're better at finding that talent. So that's some progress, but the signals are inconsistent. Pay. Well, the gender pay gap, for example, in the UK has fallen below 10% recently. On current progress, it will take 81 years to reach parity. I don't know, what I'd be, 126, God. University of Warwick in March reported on a study it did of 17,000 recent graduates in full-time work that female graduates earn thousands of pounds less than their male counterparts, even if they studied the same degree at university. Feels a bit depressing. 20% of men are paid more than £30,000 after their degree, compared with just 8% of women who earn the same. But that could be down to different qualifications. However, there's a gap even within the same ones. Female law graduates earn 28% less than men at the start of their careers. In medicine, 9% less. In education, 4.3% less. And in physical sciences, the same. So we're not doing so great on pay. Also, another signal that's inconsistent. Senior roles are still not plentiful. Yes, we have more female CEOs in the FTSE. For example, Jill McDonald became the latest one in Halford's FTSE 250 company. But there are still only 8 female CEOs in the FTSE 250. 8 of 250, not many. There are a record number of Fortune 500 CEOs in the US, 26. That's fantastic, but there are still more men called John who are CEOs in the Fortune 500 than there are women. In the UK, there are more men called John, 17 of them, as chairs and CEOs in the FTSE 100 than women, 7 chairs and CEOs in the FTSE 100. I read them out. In Australia, there are more Peters as CEOs in the ASX 200 than there are women. And the talent pipeline is still struggling to get women across the rapids, as we talk about, of those middle years between 30 and 40 in large organisations. The pyramid sort of hasn't flattened out. It's still quite pointy at the top. And globally, issues are a bit progressing at all sorts of different paces. For example, I ran a diversity panel in Japan recently in Tokyo. It was a first. Companies hadn't got together and discussed gender diversity, and they were so thankful that we'd turned up and done this. For example, in Germany, where we've got a big business, there are still some very traditional norms held in the working environment, and it's quite difficult for women with children to just make further progress. And another inconsistency is the world of STEM, science, technology, engineering and mathematics, so critical to future competitiveness of the world economy, but very challenged. Lisa Hook, who I was talking to a couple of weeks ago, she's the CEO of New Star Inc. and the Senior Independent Director at Reed Elsevier. She was sharing some stats. In 1980, when she went into the technology era of the US in the environment, there were 29% of graduates who were women. Now it's only 19% in the US. How did that happen? More than 80% of all STEM jobs are in the field of computing and engineering, yet women make up just 26% of the computing workforce and 12% of the engineering workforce. So I've given you some positive data and then some data that shows it's really quite patchy. So what are the underlying things that might mean those tailwinds can continue? So the first one, business case. It's now far less common to have to make the case for gender balance being an important thing to add better business value. There are still occasions, but the data is much more well established. For example, in the bottom line, Fortune 500 companies with the highest percentage of female directors outperform competitors with the lowest female representation. A study by Catalyst, the gender balance research group, found that 53% return on equity, higher return on equity, a 42% higher return on sales, and a 62% higher return on invested capital when you've got for the highest percentage of women on boards compared to the companies with the lowest. And also, when you've got better gender balance, there seems to be more of a focus on corporate governance, which can only be good news. The Conference Board of Canada found that boards with more women surpass all male boards in their attention to audit and risk oversight. For example, 94% of boards with 3 or more women explicitly monitor the implementation of corporate strategy, where only 66% of all male boards do. 94% of boards with 3 or more women ensure conflict of interest guidelines, only 68% of all male boards. So, other things that might be helping the following wins. Improved legislation and government focus is definitely moving forward. There are Equal Pay Acts always coming out in the UK. There was a big push by Grazia magazine recently which enabled publishing of gender pay gap to be required. It's not a solution, but these things are necessary. Of course, the Davis report meant that there was peer pressure on boards that avoided regulation, but we do need to now emanate that through the executive careers, not just the boards of companies. Another thing in terms of tailwinds, global demographics are shifting. I mentioned Japan. For example, the demographics in that country mean that there is a focus now on women having to come into the workplace post-marriage and children, which has been very rare in Japan. With an ageing population and a low birth rate and no desire for mass immigration, there's only one way to turn, and that's to the women in the economy. So for whatever motivation, those women, Shinzo Abe is now pushing more women onto boards, into executive pipeline, into public office. That obviously has its teething problems, but it's an important factor. And of course we know from the graduate numbers I shared, there are more female graduates, so there's plenty of talent to choose from. Another thing about tailwinds that things are shifting is there is more variety of acceptable roles and more choices that women have in the workforce. The norms are shifting. For example, 27% of US households have a woman as the lead income earner. Not every woman decides to have children, and similarly there are many families with no mother or 2 mothers. There are many more dual income households. And Kelly Hoppen, in an interview recently, you can tell I've been on Twitter, talked about women in UK business being optimistic to start up their own business, and there are many more women now under 30 starting up their own business with very little seed capital required. So there are a lot of norms shifting about how people's working lives and the sort of nuclear family exists. There's also the patterns of economic choices are shifting. Women make 85% of household purchase decisions, buy 58% of cars, and would you believe, are 52% of gamers. On social media, there is also help. This enables networking on a scale that was just unimaginable when I started work. As a woman in business, we've always thought about the way the men network. Actually, there's no excuse now with the social network. The connectivity and confidence this provides is critical for women, just as well as the downright exposure that can help. Finally, in terms of tailwinds, helping wins, following wins, what's acceptable in terms of some behaviour around the workplace has changed. I don't know whether any of you watch Mad Men, but I was watching the first episode of this last series and was scoffing at the TV with the behaviour in the conversations, openly discriminatory comments, and they were still in play when I started work. This is now recognised as not acceptable today, but actually there is action you can take against it. I was asked in the early 90s why I wanted to be a salesperson for polyethylene. I'm not sure why I did, but since the manager assumed as a girl I didn't like playing golf. I don't, but that's not the point. And also, he said there were plenty of lunches with the guys down the pub, so it just wasn't going to work. So I was turned down for the role, not because of my technical ability, but because of my gender and apparent associated stereotypes. And that wasn't challenged back then, but it is now. So there are still things that are helping progress, even though the data is patchy. But there are still things that are limiting progress, and these are some challenges for all of us. And I'll start with a few social and societal factors first. Number 1, biases will always be there. I saw a great quote today that said, if you have a brain, you have biases. They're just less overt now. We are more conscious of them, but do we yet make different choices about who we appoint into a role? We can have a diverse candidate slate, but if you want to make gender balance progress, you've actually got to appoint the woman into the role, not just recognise our biases. The acceptable behavioural spectrum is still narrower for women in business. Bold and feisty can be a great guy. Assertive and pushy can be the same behaviours for a woman. I think some of us have all experienced that. It does persist. And there are assumptions and biases on the female side as well that can be just as limiting. Women stepping into power, and I say power, not influence, really have to accept it and deal with it. We don't always do this. We shy away from exercising what we have, so not leveraging what already exists in terms of opportunities in the position we have. Is power a dirty word amongst women still? I think it is, partly. Some women still sense it means they will feel they will be disliked, or they're concerned that others will see them as an iron lady, and they won't be able to have the relationships that they're normally used to. They can't get their heads around power and femininity and collaboration and impact being able to work together. And I think that's a serious limiting factor. So biases still exist. Number two, the media hasn't shifted that much. We still comment on fashion. For some reason, I'm following one of the New York Times on Twitter, and I must have had about 60 or 70 tweets of pictures of fashion at the Met Ball last night. All about women. Nice dress, bad dress, looks a heap, looks dreadful. So we're obsessed still with fashion, particularly female fashion. And we look at that in terms of people in power. Remember the furore about all the female MPs recently in a cabinet reshuffle? It was all about how they looked. And yet you look at football pundits on TV, total scruffs. But I can't imagine that Gabby Logan would be allowed to look a total scruff. So appearance is still critical. But perhaps we just need to get over that one. But it is still a big story in the press when a woman fails or is perceived to fail or is removed from a role. Just look at the furore when Harriet Green left Thomas Cook recently. So a third one around limiting factors, proper development conversations. They can be hard to do, and for many, it's a fear of reaction and legal challenge. People are more comfortable giving feedback to people who are the same as them. And if you've been working in a male-dominated environment, the person giving the feedback is often the man. That's very uncomfortable for some people to have to give feedback to a woman. What happens if they cry? What happens if they hurl abuse? What happens? I'm not used to it. It can be very challenging. I've asked many of my male colleagues to sponsor women. And one of them, actually, credit to him, came into my office and said, I'm really nervous about this. Will it be misconstrued if I'm sponsoring the female colleague? Will it look like I'm looking for a wife? And that's a quote. So it can be quite uncomfortable. Another limiting factor, this is a fantastic statistic, a sense of job done rather than ongoing investment. This month's Strategic Management Journal shows the University of Maryland and Columbia Business School, a study they did of 1,500 companies between 1991 and 2011. The research shows that once one woman gets to the C-suite, then the chances of the second woman getting into that team are reduced by 50%. This is not a queen bee situation where women are shutting the door behind them, because it shows that female CEOs are shown to perform better. It's less than a 50% reduction in the chance for the next woman to be in the C-suite when there's a female CEO. And this is perceived and understood in the statistics to be due to a sense of job done. Got one woman in, everything will change, we don't need to try as hard, more women will come because we've shifted the dynamics. But the dynamics don't shift. You need 3 out of 10 in any team for the dynamics to shift in any diverse situation. And the final one around limiting factors I just wanted to share was the tone we often have to approach this issue of gender balance in the workforce. It's an either-or tone, which I think can be quite disengaging for many. It's either the tone of, number one, take part in the system more today. Lean in, women. Do more. It's up to the women. It's all there if you know how to use it. Or, second one, stand outside the system. 2 fingers up to the system, I'm not taking part, the system's the problem. There's a very anonymous manifesto on social media out the last couple of weeks called @tableflip.club. And go on Twitter, have a look at that, it's fascinating. It outlines that it's not just us, it's you, with a few expletives in the middle, and we're going to take our talent elsewhere. So this sort of either or, I think, can be polarised views, can turn a lot of people off about making progress. So finally, on the limiting factors, the structural stuff, because those are all societal factors. From my experience in large organisations, I think large organisations are going to be increasingly challenged to adjust their structures for an employee population who no longer fits the mould. The mould of nuclear family, one income. The mould of either I want a steady career or I go to the top and never shall the gradient change. And the sort of previous norm of I'm rewarded tangibly by money or real tangible rewards. These norms don't fit for everybody. It fits for an increasingly smaller percentage of the workforce today. And yet large organisations, because they're so large, they have to create some sort of mould, are going to be, are set up like that and are going to be finding it more challenging to find more bespoke solutions going forward. And large organisations can tend to fall into the trap of, well, getting maternity leave right and we'll be sorted. You have to get it right, but that doesn't sort it. It's necessary, but absolutely not sufficient. Because the norms are shifting, as I mentioned, demographics of working couples, as I said, there are also challenges for large organisations to structurally deal with around a narrow understanding of fear around working agility. Sometimes large organisations can think it's purely women working part-time. So we're talking about agile working, woman working part-time, no. Or even people shirking the system and really just going to shop at Sainsbury's on a Friday. Whereas the way the world works has already changed. Dual careers, global roles, Wi-Fi, work anywhere. So it's a structural challenge for some of these large behemoth organisations who are, as well as SMEs, critical to the competitiveness of our economy going forward. They employ so many people, and yet quite structurally, the norms they're assuming are only relevant for a shrinking percentage of the population going forward. So my first point was quite a long one. Don't worry, they won't all be that long. About progress, but patchy, and don't expect miracles anytime soon. So the second point, with all the focus, a shifting world and yet only uneven progress, how do we move forward? Is it all just in the too hard bucket and we should just chillax? Well, there's no silver bullet. It takes a long time and every single action matters. We've come a long way in 25 years. And as I say, look what can happen with a peer pressure, for example, the Davies report. I've also found at BP we can really make progress. It is a bit like a full body contact sport and you can't do it half-heartedly or you'll get trodden by the norms that just reappear and the biases that just we all have. We need to focus on systems thinking. It's not just one intervention and it's got to be from multiple stakeholders. It's got to be a mix of government legislation, peer pressure, public debate, organisations focusing on their structures and ways of working, and individuals, men and women, working together. And while the demographics and the ways people live their lives and careers are changing in the meantime, we can't just sit back and wait. We're losing the opportunity for more talent to be more productive by driving better gender balance through the talent pipeline. So what are the different roles there are to play? The role of legislatures. As I've mentioned, quotas, equal pay, equal right, peer pressure, working groups. There's a lot going on in countries and a lot more can and should go on. Quotas on boards in Norway, France, Iceland, Spain and Italy. The UK has chosen differently. In Germany, they have just put a 30% push in place for those in supervisory roles. As I said earlier, though, we've got to be careful to focus on the management, not just the boards. The role of companies and organisations to make progress. Of course, organisations can work with schools to ensure more women get attracted into the workforce, probably their workforces, and work generally across the whole educational spectrum. But inside the organisation, they've got to focus as well on some of the structural and cultural issues that I mentioned earlier. There needs to be a conscious philosophy about women in business, addressing it as a talent issue for competitiveness, not one for just doing the right thing. In BP, we have a model for approaching this through 5 lenses, a systems approach. So I'll just run through those 5 lenses. First of all, get it inside your business strategy, no matter what business you're in. Talk about it, the importance of gender balance internally and externally, and embed the actions inside your business plan, not alongside it. The second thing is about leaders owning this progress. Appeal to the personal situations of leaders. They probably have daughters, they probably want them to succeed. And one-to-one sessions to discuss the issues. Measure something, agree something to measure, whether it's a goal, whether it's KPIs. People like to measure something and measure progress. Could be balance of women in senior roles, it could be how many senior teams are we going to have with 3 out of 10 women in them. And leaders, get them to sponsor talent. It does make a difference. And also train leaders to inquire on people's aspirations, draw out what people want to achieve. Too often we do put that mould onto people's aspirations. The third lens we use is processes. You've got to weave this through the processes of your organisation. You have to have a lens around better gender balance through your succession planning, your recruitment, your learning, your development, and ensure line managers have an accountability for making progress to develop future diverse talent. The fourth lens is that organisations can do structurally is create a better culture and working environment, have women's networks, have a set of values that people can relate to, provide coaching for men to be equipped with this shift in the norms. It's not just about mentoring women to be bolder. Do you have internal social media that you can use where women can find their voice more? For example, inside BP we have Yammer, and we have found that there's a huge percentage of our female population are very vocal on Yammer, which is actually the flip from external social media. So sometimes in large organisations, women can find this social media a way to get their voice across and gain confidence and build connectivity. And the fifth lens is measurement, as I've said. Measure something. But don't just track your headline representation. Look beneath and spot trends and spot weak or strong signals and track engagement levels. Track exit interviews. Track people coming back from maternity leave, from paternity leave, from shared parental leave. Track, and build some trends. So as an organisation, step back and think, how is work done today really? How do people really lead their lives? And what assumptions are we making about talent and how it works? Rethink those assumptions about nuclear family, tangible rewards, career tracks that only go one way with the same gradient. They are vital in large organisations if we are to make progress in gender balance across the talent pipeline in the next 10 years. Which brings me to my third point, the changing environment overall. And how we need to think less about women thriving inside the system or standing outside it, that polarised view, and more about recognising the system is different and a different one is emerging. The more I see the shifts going on and the opportunities as well as the limiting factors, I think it's about finding a balance between fitting into the system and outside it for women. And it's not just about men helping women. It's about a true recognition that things have changed. The system, as it was, doesn't hold anymore. The norms are different. This is a next generation of men and women who expect to work more equally around all the different roles in life. They are less focused on gender balance. I did a focus group in Australia a couple of years ago where the younger generation in the room actually said to me, "You're a dinosaur. Why are you having this gender conversation?" This is about how we as men and women work together more productively and merge our lives and work. This is not about men v women. They're thinking global, virtual, flexibility, variety, constant change, values, fulfillment. This is not a women's fight, it's a movement for equality, for inclusion, both ways. So the way the world works and expects to work has changed, and we need to catch up with ourselves. The norms did work, they worked for a long time, but I don't think they work at scale anymore. And women already in the workforce, though, shouldn't just wait for those following winds to move to become this whole new system. So to my fourth point, the role of women as individuals taking the opportunities that this evolving world, an evolving set of norms offers. And I'm going to share a little checklist that I've been using and developed over the last few years from my own experience and I use to mentor other women. It comes from a lot of trial and a huge amounts of error, and it has 4 elements: context, clarity, confidence, and choice. And this isn't just about how to become a CEO, it's about you and your definition of success and fulfillment. It's about not waiting for something to happen or waiting for the system to sort it out. It's about your responsibility as a woman or a man to play your part in further progress. So context, what do I mean by that? I ask women to understand where they are today, what's going on around them, whether this is the same for decades to come or years to come or not. Get real, but don't let it box you in. If you're in a partnership at home, what's the balance of who will lead and who will follow on the career, and how are you going to address that? How is the organisational and industry environment around you changing? Think of different scenarios that may happen and be ready for them. The context never stays still, it's constantly changing, but don't bury your head in the sand. The second point is clarity. Are you really clear what you're good at? What do you love doing? What would you want to lead, and where would you want to head with this? Where's your passion really, and your true expertise? When you think about roles you have done or you're doing, and what are the elements where your energy was unending and you felt confident, because there will be some. What are those things you bring to a team beyond your professional certifications? And are you clear on what your brand is? How do others see you if they were to describe you? Is it what you would expect them or even want them to say? Do you even know what it is? Oops, sorry. And if you were to sum it all up, do you know what that dream role looks like or what it could even turn into? Confidence. You have to be able to articulate with confidence and succinctly what it is you're about, where you want to head, and what you want to bring to the table. You need to stand out. Don't let people tell you who you are, speaking articulately and succinctly. And people aren't telepathic. And given the continued existence of underlying biases, then don't expect things to happen if you just rely on doing good work and hoping people notice. It doesn't work like that. I am not saying you'll get what you want if you say it, but if you don't, you won't. Letting people know that all options are open and you just want to do a good job will mean you get what you get. And it makes you harder to place or advocate for you as a line manager if that's how you are. So choices. So you've thought about your context, you've got clear what you're good at, and you know what you love doing, and you're able to articulate it succinctly and with confidence. If only it was so simple to now make the choices. You now have to make them and to how to go after your goals, how to live your life, and how to balance it all. What are the trade-offs you will make, as everyone has to make some? How do you deliver your role? The level of risk you choose to take in your role. The roles you want to do, don't want to do, but feel you should. There's all a lot of choices here. I always share with women who I'm mentoring, don't you dare be a victim and say, but it just happened to me. It didn't. You chose to let it happen, or you choose to do something else. But I also say this having it all concept, I don't even know what that's supposed to be. Isn't that a personal choice of how you even define that? Don't like that concept. So, how have I applied this checklist? My context. I love working. My husband and I agreed a way of deciding whose career took precedent 15 years ago when we got married, and we revisit that often. Fortunately for me, I get to work. And I've always been conscious of the industry I work in and the history and the norms involved. I push boundaries, but I'm very clear what those norms and boundaries and where they are in the first place. My clarity. 8 years ago, as I mentioned earlier, after 16 years of a deeply commercial focus, I turned to this sort of work, focusing on the organisation as an asset to be invested in, as a core driver of business value through better diversity, higher engagement, alignment of purpose, all leading to higher productivity. My confidence. I had to become extremely clear what I wanted to do, and this role that I've done for the last number of years, but it didn't exist. I had to be very clear, focused, determined, and very resilient in the early days as I shifted my career brand. After many false starts, I had enough support at senior levels to try out my work, and in the end people could see that there was tangible business value, and that I was determined and focused with my business case, and that I had a real talent that was fairly unique in the company. If I hadn't been clear, I'd have ended up doing very, very different roles for the last few years. So my choices, what choices did I make? So number one, I chose to totally rebrand my career inside BP. Plenty of colleagues said to me as I rebranded, literally they said this, when are you going to get a proper job? At which point I said, the very reason you're asking me that question is the very reason why I want to do this role, which they didn't get. I was also asked, have you lost your ambition? So it wasn't easy, and I had to be clear what I was about and know my choices were not the norm, and that I had to choose to make those choices every day and to keep pushing forward my business case and proving tangible value. And finally, the recognition of the value it brought came through, and I've had the most fulfilling years of my career so far by a long shot. My second choice, I've just made another one. I've recently chosen to leave that 24-year career in BP, which I didn't know when I was going to make this speech. And I'm going to set up my own company to continue the work I know that I'm best at, advising boards and advising executive teams and management teams on how to bring organisational behaviour to the core of their strategy delivery and how to shift patterns of that organisational behaviour to better deliver that strategy. I'm also going to continue with and deepen my role as a non-exec director and give back to making further progress on gender balance in the workforce. It does feel like jumping out of a plane, totally, but as the book's title says, feel the fear and do it anyway. And a quick gulp. This work is not just my passion, but my career and now my specialism, and I'm very ambitious to be a renowned expert within it. So to sum up, I am about to finish. The data shows progress, with some following wins and some headwinds. We can't expect a silver bullet to fix gender balance in the business world. It's up to all of us. Individuals, organisations, legislatures, we have to keep focusing on this. For men already in business, please get equipped to deal with this. It's happening. For women, take the opportunities that the following wins present. Think hard about your goals and go for them. Deliver, 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 or you have no right for choices. If you're entering the workforce, don't put limiting factors into your head. If you're in the workforce and established, be honest if you're really following your goals and your expertise. Others aren't telepathic. Give something back to other women as well. Do your bit as a mentor or sponsor. Madeleine Albright, ex-Secretary of State, has always said, there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. She's so right. The following wins are portents of the system really changing. Not just people working inside it or outside it. The norms are shifting. Lady Barbara Judge, who's just taken over the head of the Institute of Directors, was in the FT last week. And she referred to the membership of the Institute of Directors as having long been overrepresented by men in their 60s. But their new category of membership for young entrepreneurs is showing much more balance around gender diversity. So I leave you with a question. What is each of us in this room doing as part of our organisation or individually to enable men and women to have equal opportunities to thrive in the application of their talent, ambition and goals and be recognised fairly for that? It's not a nice to have, it's essential for future competitiveness. Thank you. I'm very happy to take questions. Yes, Phil.
So it's sort of what I'm trying to find a way of making it to a question. I went to another very interesting lecture last week, an inaugural lecture by Alex Nunn in the Politics Department, talking about the politics of inequality. And one of the points that came across very clearly from some of the data he showed there was that whilst ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic class have a factor, when you add them together, they can have an even more divisive impact. And I suppose it's something we're very interested in here in terms of if you look at the gender outcomes by degree class of students, they're pretty well equal to their gender split between students. If you add in socioeconomic background and age and ethnicity, they can be vastly disparate. What are your reflections on that in terms of business?
Yes and yes. I mean, you only have to look at, up until recently, even in the FTSE 100, the women who were really succeeding mostly were American. So there's almost, you can put a lens over this and say we're making huge progress on diversity, which actually for a lot of people means women, and actually means white women, and actually British and American women, and pretty much American women, and probably from a middle class, Midwest or East Coast or West Coast background. So yeah, I really think the norms are shifting, progress is shifting, but hence I said at the start it's an OECD background I'm coming from, because the challenges are really there inside the data that I know about, which is BP's data. Yeah, the top probably 20 odd women in the company, pretty much American and British, and you could say that just comes from our background. But I think those challenges are really there. The more lenses diversity an individual has, they become even more unique in the workforce at the most senior levels. And so I think we have to look at everybody as being multifaceted over time and say, actually, you're not one, you're the other. Everybody has very many lenses of diversity. But we've got to start making progress somewhere and get the numbers in. So yeah, I completely agree with it. It is still a massive challenge. And if we just only continue to focus on one lens of diversity, we will miss a lot of tricks. It's a very, very relevant, pertinent point. I haven't got any answers. Yes.
Hi Kirsty, I'm Sarah. Thank you, it's really interesting. I'm a fellow 2%er as well, and I think Heather would describe me as a leaky bucket person as well, which I guess you're in the same bucket as me now too. So I
am a leaky bucket.
A leaky bucket because you come out of the corporate world. So we're both leaky.
Sure, I like that too.
I know, I'm not sure I like it either, but I had a kind of career in finance and banking at quite a senior level, and I was really interested in what you were talking about as women get into their the kind of the period between 30s and 40s, which unfortunately I'm at the wrong end of that. But you know, it's really interesting when I look at women that I've mentored and how they push through the organisation, and how in their 20s it's very much gung-ho, they're all for it, they work really well, they work the system really well, and then suddenly they get into the 30s, maybe they get married, they start a family, and it's a whole new ball game for them. What do you think are the key pitfalls and things for, you know, women in the room today to take away for that part of their career?
I think there's no one pitfall, and there's no one answer. If only there were. But I do think it's something I touched on around large organisations and the assumptions of the way the world works and the assumptions of the norms. The norms just aren't the norms anymore, they're different norms. And if large employers could find a way to think of talent outcomes as more bespoke, which can be costly and can be very difficult, around agility, around careers going fast and then flattening off and then going down and then going up, but this sort of jungle gym of a career rather than, well, surely you want to go that way or you want to go that way, and any other discussion is don't understand. So if large organisations could start to think about retaining and developing talent in itself as assets in a more bespoke way, that would help. I think as women, this whole thing about get clear and make choices, and be bold about what you do want. It's got to be a mixture of your partnership and your living partnership that you're working through, and lots of talk there. For everybody there's a different solution. For some people it just doesn't work. You tend to think if there's two people working in the same company, it'll get sorted. It can be even more challenging for some. And you see in the UK a lot of women starting up their own businesses because they're just saying anybody else's definition of norm of what I should be doing don't work for me, so I'm going to do what I can and what I want to at my own pace, which can often then take off even faster. So I don't think there's one answer.
That's what I've just done.
Have you? Oh, well done, well done. But I do think it has to be, women have to get really clear, what do you want, what are you good at, go for it, because if you don't say it, it won't happen. And we all know the people who are most successful are the people who are most passionate about what they're doing. And then the other side is the large employers really need to take a look at how does the world work today. I know personally I do a lot of work in Terminal 5 in Heathrow. I have a boss who says, I don't care where you work, how you work, when you work, you deliver to this. You can work 1 hour, 150 hours a week. Just deliver. And if I need to see you face to face, I expect you to be there. And that gives me immense opportunity and freedom. So we need to sort of train up line managers as well, I think, to say, if your staff is talent, trust them and set boundaries around delivery, not around inputs. I could go on. Does that help?
Very good, yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Kirsty, I guess I'm Tim. I describe myself as got a hole in my bucket rather than a leaky bucket.
I'm not sure this bucket thing
I know.
works. I'm going to ditch the bucket.
Two things. One of the things I do is I help coach people for judicial appointments.
Yeah.
And I probably help more women achieve judicial appointments. And I think they're changing gradually in terms of their process and approach, which is positive. But when I work with businesses and organisations, I think the stress and almost like learned helplessness they're under, the smaller organisations, they just don't have the resource, the time to step back and think and to understand. I'd love to try and cut and paste a lot of your ideas into different businesses, but there's no time, so they're focused on and that way, I think people drop back to the old ways of doing things.
Yes, because we've talked a lot about biases. It's what you know, what you're comfortable with. It's always worked, therefore I'm just going to keep doing it. There's so many things to balance. I can't step back and do all this thinking about this diversity stuff as well. So I recognise it's difficult in any organisation. I do think you can try some things out in smaller parts of a large organisation or in smaller organisations that can have a more tangible impact faster. But you've got to make that space, and it can be very, very difficult in the economic environment we've just been through. Incredibly difficult. But at the same time, you did see far more women actually set up on their own and go and become entrepreneurs, and perhaps that was a factor. But again, there's no easy answer, is there? There's no easy answer. This until gender balance or until that next generation of leaders who have grown up with this sense of Wi-Fi work anywhere, we all work together productively, it's not a gender conversation, really comes through. I think us lot, I'm bracketing you and me as us lot, we've got to make the best of what we can. We can't wait for that next generation to come, but I don't think we're going to make perfect progress until then, because we are too conditioned by a number of our pasts, by a number of the structures we work with, and as you say, the economic and legal realities around us to step back and think about this stuff. The next generation coming through who doesn't think about this stuff as much because it's just not the way they've grown up, we can learn something from them. But it's difficult, isn't it?
Just have a fear, because my daughter's doing the first year of A-levels, and I think the way that the girls are being treated now, the young women are being treated, is almost a shift, because the boys feel more powerless coming through the education system.
Oh, okay.
So as a power, there's a generation coming through where there's more sexism going through at that younger age, which gives me concerns about how those young women will develop.
What, in terms of what they've got too much confidence?
The boys are threatened, the boys have lost power.
Ah.
The boys have lost power, and therefore I think there's more objectification of women, of young women, of girls, and I think that becomes very, very hard to work out what your identity is. And I think with the overload of information, again, it's very hard for people to work out their identity. And that scares me or gives me concern about how sometimes you get golden moments. It's just about working better, but then it gets lost because other factors come in.
Complex world, isn't it? Yeah. So maybe me saying don't expect miracles in 5 to 10 years. Not going to be miracles in 25 to 100 years. We are the human race. We will forever be imperfect, and be ever working this through. Yeah, it's a very good point. I have 2 boys, so for which sometimes I'm very grateful. Question behind.
As an undergraduate student, so I'm not even really starting my career yet, being confident and having clarity in what I want to do, and confidence doing a lot of unpaid internships and work experience and that kind of thing. What advice can you give to like us younger women that are just starting out with our confidence and being clear on what we want to do and where we want to go, but being kind of at the bottom of the ladder?
For me, I think it goes to that context bit I said at the start. So there is always a challenge when you're in an established sort of leadership position of looking at the younger talent and going, oh, they're just impatient, and oh, they've got to do the hard graft, and all this ambition, and so and yet you don't want to dampen that ambition and that thirst and that hunger and that drive for learning. And all generations can learn a lot from each other. So I think it goes to that first point I mentioned about context. You have to, at some point in your career, do the hard yards to get experience, because otherwise people need to see that you can do something tangibly. Not everybody can take a leap of faith on everybody, or we'd all be running with our gut and there'd be sort of all sorts of interesting economic disasters. So I think that context at the younger age, there is a lot of work hard, get a lot of experience under your belt, and you'll probably know when your gut tells you you're fairly clear on what you want to do. It didn't hit me till I was 36, 37. For 10, 15 years in my career, I spent a lot of time doing roles, avoiding roles I didn't want to do, and ended up doing roles that I did like to do because I didn't know what I wanted to do. For some people it comes very vocationally, very young. A friend of mine at 16 said, I want to be a doctor. And, she is a head, neck and throat oncologist at Derriford Hospital in Plymouth and has always been on that path. I didn't know what I wanted to do. But at some point you have to do the hard yards. She did a lot of hard yards just to get to what she wanted. So the internships, the experience, the broadening out your CV, it's all great. One, to give people a tangible sense of who you are and what you've done, and you'll deliver. And 2, working out what you might not want to do as well as what you do want to do. But 20s, give it one heck of a push. Yes, at the back.
I wonder, you were saying that it's fairly recently taken the decision to obviously go it alone and start up your own thing, play a number of different roles in different areas, and I wondered what were the triggers for you, and you said talking about the fear and what it was that inside you decided, what, this is a different path I'm going to take now and make that decision.
I wasn't going to get that question. A number of things over a long period of time. I've been to one school, 3 to 18, one university, 18 to 21, and one company, 21 till the end of this year, till almost 46. And there's a bit of me that says you can't just do 3 phases of your life, Kirsty. Come on, you've got to go for it. I've always been somebody who has taken a lot of risks, but within a clear boundary. And I was getting to a point in my life thinking, am I actually institutionalised? Am I actually living life within I love it, and it's fulfilling, but am I living life within a set of boundaries just because I've always done that? So that was one element. Another element was, maybe I'm getting a bit belligerent, but I want to have more control over my own diary. And I love working, and I work ridiculously long hours, and I work too much. But I wanted to have the opportunity to plan my own diary a year ahead, and if I want to take 6 weeks off, want to take 6 weeks off, which you can't do in a large corporation. It's just not feasible, and absolutely right. But thirdly, the most important is, as I said at the end, I really realised this is not just my passion, this is my career and my specialism. And I'm very ambitious, and you can't just go up in a large corporation with your specialism and just say, but I'm ambitious, so I want to do it at the very top of the company as CEO. It doesn't work like that. There are certain jobs in large corporations. So you put all that together and you go, maybe it's time to think about something else. And me and my boss have had lots of conversations. We're in a fantastic place. I'm going to continue working with him long after I've left BP. And everybody's actually, interestingly, in the company, quite excited. I thought I'd have lots of people going, you traitor after 24 years and all this advice to women and you're leaving. No, everybody's been amazing and said, oh, you're actually making the choices that you talk about people making. Doesn't make me any less terrified. I've actually got to go and not have a paycheck at the end of the month. And I don't know how I'm going to do it, but in my gut, it's time. There's sort of no more logic than that, really. Yes?
Was there like a pivotal point in your career where you felt actually this is changing, I can definitely get into management now, where you kind of might have felt like a push against before and then you suddenly realise actually I can do it?
There's been a number of key moments actually, and I've just had about 4 flashing in my head, and I don't know whether I could get into management, but they were things that taught me something. So one was in 1998, BP and then American company called Amoco had just announced they were merging. And my boss, I was working in the Treasury Department, said, I need to go and meet my counterpart in New York for the day. You're coming with me as my bag carrier. So apart from the first class on British Airways, which was quite amazing, I just opened my eyes up to a global career that I hadn't really thought about before I'd worked in Europe. And then as a result, I went off and worked for 2 years in Chicago in Amoco's headquarters, and it was fantastic. So that was a critical moment that opened my eyes to, I could be more than I'm doing. Another time I learnt about what I do now was actually going into that headquarters of that company and being the only person from BP in that whole department, and everybody else was from Amoco. And oddly, I was observing their company culture from them not really knowing what was going on anymore because BP was in charge. I was from the in-charge company, but on my own. And it opened my eyes up to how do people work when they don't really know the now unwritten rules. So that was a key moment. I started observing how organisations work and how rules are set and how people find their way around. But probably a very, very critical moment was when I'd come back from my first maternity leave. And my first maternity leave, I was asked to go back over to Chicago with George, who was 6 months older then, and obviously Dave, my husband. And I did a great job as a chief of staff role for the head of BP America for about 15 months. And towards the end of that, I was looking for a new role, and who I didn't realise then was my sponsor, came along and said, I'm reorganising the petrochemicals function, petrochemicals business in the whole of the company. I'd like you to do this role, head of European sales, marketing, logistics for the whole of petrochemicals. Okay, great. He said, I know you haven't ever managed anybody before, but it's about time. It's really too long since you haven't managed anybody. So I'm going to give you 250 people. Okay. And I'm going to give you a grade rise and make you this thing called group leader, which is top 500 of the company. Really? And I was 33. Terrified, absolutely terrified. And he was brilliant. I spoke to my current boss who said, right, you've now got to not do, you've got to lead other people to do. So get out of the spreadsheets, get out of the PowerPoint, you've got to lead other people, so that's you've got to learn. And secondly, my new boss gave me a coach for a year. He said, I know you've got the potential to do this job, but you can't do this job yet unless you've got a coach. And you have to have that coach, and you're going to see them for 2 hours every 2 weeks, and they're going to teach you how to be a leader. And it was a huge thrill to be invested in like that. But it was that first few months of that role were really, really hard, because I'd also found out I was pregnant with a second child as well. And then the guy went and split the business in half, and I had to make a whole load of people redundant. So I learned a lot, that real pivotal moment. But having a coach through that really gave me the focus of what was the difference from being the person who did everything to being the leader who asked other people to do stuff. I could go on, there's more moments, but those are the ones that sort of stick in my mind. And I was aged around, those moments I've told you about go from between 28 to 33, 34. Questions have dried up. One more question, yeah. I think we've got time for. Yes,
coming from a larger business like BP, with all of the tools and processes and I suppose data that can make things very tangible and easy to kind of show tangible results.
Yeah.
Clearly the SME market plays a key part in driving our economy. How would you advise kind of female leaders within the SME marketplace who don't necessarily have all of that information to hand to still be able to drive that agenda?
So not having had experience of SME, I would have to go from what I see might work. I think social media is hugely valuable these days. I mean, you can go on Twitter and find anything, and take part in conversations. There's all sorts of stuff going on. So that's the first thing. Go and get involved in the debate. The second thing, go and attend the events. There's so much data that is shared at events now that it doesn't matter if you haven't got your own data. There's enough data out there that you can tap into, and there's enough research institutes and memberships that you can just pay a small fee for that will give you all of the data and the help that you need. There are also organisations like the 2% Club, like an inspirational journey, where you can go and send your individuals onto networking and training events as well around gender balance and women as leaders. So there's plenty out there, absolutely, for the SME market without you having to run your processes the same. And it doesn't cost that much because of the social media. There's quite a growing body of women helping women, actually, now particularly in the UK. It's quite a growing network. I can see a couple of people nodding. There's quite a lot.
Okay then, ladies and gentlemen, it just leaves me to draw things to a close. I found that a really inspirational and fantastic talk. I think we've been very privileged, and I think it's obvious you're going on your own, but it's very clear that your passion and drive will make your business a real success. And I'm sure we'd all wish to show our thanks and wish you well in a new career.